used to speaking to middle school and high school students, so if you want to throw things or feel the need to throw yourself over a pew or run around, that's my norm. So, first off, you should know I really do enjoy students. I think middle schoolers are delightful. High schoolers are my jam, and I realize that's weird. This summer we hosted a youth retreat, and it was just Riverside. We had 40 plus kids there. It took me a really long time to find a worship leader, and I was shocked that it was so hard. And then it occurred to me, not everybody is dying to give up a weekend to hang out with that many students. And so it was a good reality check for me. But we have a great team. I work with great volunteers who also just truly enjoy being around students. So I've been doing this for a long time, over 20 years, and I will say that Gen Z, who we're talking about today, they are really different than past generations. What I've always done in ministry doesn't necessarily hold up now. And that's good to know. That's good to remember. If we look to Jesus as the example of ministry, which he is the example of ministry, then we get to see him get to know individuals. He spent time with people. He spoke their language. He used different parables to where they were. He treated them with importance. He treated them with dignity. He didn't talk down to people. He met them where they were. So Gen Z is no different. Kids get written off because, well, middle schoolers they're kind of annoying, but they're awesome. I can say that. I have 3 Gen Zers in my house. I was a middle schooler way back when. You might have been a while, might not have been that long ago, but you remember what it was like to be in middle school and high school and trying to figure out who you are. The Gen Z that we're talking about, I don't know if you can see that. So there's, if you look at the info about the age group, it kind of differs in years. And I don't know why nobody has landed on it's this specific year to this specific year, but so we're just going to go with today around 1997 to 2012, which puts this age group from 9 years old to 24 years old. And like I said, that can go back and forth about a year. The next generation who is already born, so that's 8 and younger, is Gen Alpha. But they're kids. We don't really know what's going to happen with them yet, so we're just going to stay with Gen Z today. So they're the largest generation, Gen Z is. They make up around 27% of our current population, which is roughly 61 million people. So this generation matters. You might think, well, I don't have kids yet. There's other people that can hang out with those students, so I don't have to. The thing is that being the largest generation, they are the biggest influence, and they're coming up quickly. There are kids right now, that includes my 4th grader at home, through folks who are entering the workforce right now, who are becoming members of churches, who are visiting your churches, or entering your counseling offices. So I wish that I could have introduced you to some of my Gen Z friends. They're awesome. I started out, when I was thinking about this, like, I don't know how long ago it was, but I just asked them, I sent a text message to a group of high schoolers and said, hey, what do you want adults to know about your generation right now? So these are some of the quotes. We have very little will to live collectively. We have very little will to live collectively. Success is important. Balancing school plus obligations with people around us. Making other people happy and not offending anyone. Being able to be my authentic self without fearing my safety. There's a lot coming at us all at once. That quote was from my 7th grader, my daughter, and she doesn't even have social media, and she already recognizes all of the voices coming at her. Gen Z is not afraid to speak their differences. So they're a really complex group. And we're going to look at some of their characteristics. So these things, I just pulled a couple of them that I felt like were really relevant to where we are in this cultural moment and where we are in talking about Jesus and faith, and in some of the things that Mark Ryan talked about with deconstruction and learning what you believe. I have an interesting group. My high schoolers right now are a mix of a lot of kids who've grown up in church. So they believe because they grew up believing, and that's where they are. We've got some students who are in that place where they're like, I don't think I believe any of this is true. And then I have some who talk about what they believe and they're losing friends because of what they believe. And so it's an interesting group when we all meet together and we talk. It's so good to have all of them be able to voice their opinions, to where they can ask questions, share their doubts, be heard, that other people can learn how to share their own faith, and then be able to trust each other, to be able to learn nuance with each other at a young age. The other part of it is in those kids who've grown up in a Christian home, in churches, they own their own faith, so that when they leave, they own their faith. It's not just because I always believed. They know why they believe, and they can give you reasons why. And so asking those questions is a great thing, and we'll get to that. So the first part of it I wanted to talk about. Oh, hold on a minute. Let me go back. I know it's a good quote, isn't it? I did ask a couple students a question. I said, if you point two stories from the Bible, or point out a story that you love, that speaks to you, or that you really struggle with, or it just doesn't make sense to you, what would you say? So I had one response that somebody said, I really struggle with Adam and Eve. I really struggle with the creation story going all the way back to Genesis. It makes me uncomfortable because of who I am. And then I had, and we'll kind of deconstruct that a little bit. And then on the other side, somebody else said, my favorite story is when Jesus meets the woman at the well, because it reminds me that Jesus would even want to hang out with me. And so those are two important things as we look at some of these trends of why those two stories are different. They come from the same gospel. They all point towards Jesus. They all point towards our faith and hope. But we're going to kind of look at how they speak to Gen Z differently. Okay, so the first part, Gen Z wants information. I found that meme and I thought it was really funny. You keep using this word research, and I don't think it means what you think it means. And then this quote that I come back to a lot, there's a lot of information in the world, but not a lot of wisdom. Right now, students spend most of their time on some sort of digital technology. And because of this access, they are more aware of the realities of life. They have more access to news stories, what's happening in the world, war, immigration, protests, what's going on in the world. They can see the news anytime they want, and they can find it from any source. Having a narrow scope of information creates a bias in the midst of gathering a lot of facts. Students are trying to figure out the world. They don't know what their sources are for news, and so sometimes that's TikTok. Sometimes that's only one news source. Sometimes that's only one person that they follow. And that's true for all of us, right? Back at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my husband, and it was something about, like, I think at that point, right, they were talking about extending it past 2 weeks. And my husband was like, no, everybody is saying this. And no, everybody is saying this. And we realized it was because our Twitter feeds look very different. And so we were hearing everybody say those things, but it was in our own scope of information. And it's the same for students. They think that they're gathering a lot of information. They have it on their cell phones, iPads. I think most schools now give kids some sort of tablet or computer, and they do have blocks on them, but all of the students figure out how to get around that for good reasons and bad reasons. I remember one of my high school friends in the spring saying, I don't know when all my friends became so passionate about Palestine. And they were like, we don't, and she was able to recognize, we don't know what's going on in the world. I know what's going on in my neighborhood and my sphere of influence, but she was watching her friends post things and talk about things like an expert without the reality of really knowing the whole story. And with that ability of just reposting information, which is a dangerous place to be in. The good side of gathering all of this information is that they have a lot of information. And so one thing in our youth group that we changed, in the past we've had a cell phone box. So like at first everybody was like, oh my gosh, no, you can't take my phone away from me. And then it kind of became a game and everybody would take turns with the cell phone box, collecting cell phones and to take away that distraction. Now we're at a place where we're leaning into it. And so when we say, hey, read from John today, pull out your phone, let's look at your Bible app. Let's lean into that. Over Christmas, when we weren't meeting for a little while, we were able to use YouVersion, the Bible app, and do a study with some kids and be able to talk about it at home and encourage them that there are great resources, particularly with their faith, that they can find good information. And so it's about, as adults, being able to point them in the right direction of where good information is and what isn't, because they don't know, because their brains aren't formed yet, so they don't know, and to be able to guide them in that. So they have all this access for information, and they really do desire answers and facts about things. I talked with a student earlier this week who was like, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. I was like, okay, let's talk about it. And she was like, there aren't any facts to back it up. And I was like, well, hold on a minute. And so we talked about the historical facts about Jesus. And she was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then was able to kind of explore that a little bit more. So the interesting piece to this of having more information and more facts and that desire to know more is that they are becoming a more cautious culture. They're less likely to have sex younger. They're less likely to drive under the influence. But the flip side of this desire for safety is that they often feel anxiety when faced with ideas and beliefs that are different from their own. And so that sense of being cautious, of being careful, of knowing a lot of things, when there's pushback, that becomes a more difficult situation. You can be named toxic quickly, or you just don't understand, which, I said you don't understand when I was that age too, but there really is that belief behind that of you don't understand, and I can find 5 other ways that can back me up and prove you wrong. Gen Z struggles with more mental health issues than ever before. I found this statistic that was from 2019. Only 45% of Gen Z individuals say their mental health is good or excellent. 91% said they experienced a physical or emotional symptom due to stress and mental illness in the last year. That was before COVID. It's true that we know more now about mental health. It's true that we have better ways of diagnosing, and we have more access to providing encouragement and treatment and support, but they really are overwhelmed. There's constant pressure from multiple sources. I remember, I'm 41, I'm old, but not that old. And I remember thinking when I was a student, like, okay, where am I gonna go to college? Those were the biggest stressors that I had. There's a lot more being thrown at students because of the information they have access to. Social media, we can't ignore that. I know a lot that gets excused for a lot of things, but that's a reality, that bullying looks different, interactions with other people look differently. That goes along with the fact that they are very lonely. They're very connected in a lot of ways, but we know, looking at them, that real connection is when you're looking at somebody face to face. When you're vulnerable, you're having a conversation, you know how to have a disagreement, you can care for somebody face to face. And it's that trick of, well, I have all of these likes, I have this big circle, but that's not really fulfilling that need that we were designed for, to connect with other people. So a couple statistics. 75% of Gen Z respondents reported feeling stress about school shootings. In another poll, it was reported that almost half of Gen Z respondents reported being connected online for 10 or more hours a day. More screen time means less time spent connecting with others in person, which will increase isolation and loneliness. Which that ultra connectedness then leads to more stress and pressure on downtime. And so rest is impossible. If you've been around this generation, if you come to my house and we say turn off your screen, it's a little bit of a mess. Sorry. Gen Z has an increased stress due to world issues that they're privy to. This has made their world very big, or seem very big, that they know a lot more, when in fact, really, as a student, your world is very small. Your sphere of influence is very small. And so with students, we try to remember that in a non-condescending way. But, hey, your neighborhood is your school. The people who are around you at your school. It's not your job to worry about what's happening in another country right now. It's great that you are thinking about other people. It is amazing the kind of empathy that students have, but their sphere of influence is their neighbor right now. And that creates anxiety in itself, because our culture is like, no, do something. And they can't. They're 13. And so that creates stress and pressure in itself. And then, like I said before, pressure related to social media and technology. Even students who aren't on social media, with their devices at school, there are chats. There's chats over Gmail and whatever software their schools use. And sometimes the teachers and administration at school will catch what's going on in conversations. Often they don't. So another interesting quote that I read was this. It was by a student that I don't know. And ultimately, that just pushed you deeper into a sense of not belonging, and Gen Z digs deeper into loneliness. Yes, this generation is more to ask for help, and they don't experience the stigma that older generations have dealt with in seeking out therapy, talking to a psychiatrist. The one thing I would want to point out is that as a youth worker, as a pastor, wherever you're at, it's important to know about these things. It's important to know the signs when you're working with students who are in crisis, who are really struggling. It's also important to know your limitations, to know when it's appropriate for you to step in, when it's appropriate to ask for help. And so it's really important for adults, wherever you're at, to have resources in your back pocket, to know which counselors can meet with kids, to have a psychiatrist that you know and trust, to be able to have support, mentors that you can call on to meet with students. Because we can't be everything for everyone. I'm a counselor, but I don't meet with students with therapy. That's not my place. I'm their youth director. And so when I meet with students and I see that maybe another intervention needs to happen, or they need to meet with somebody regularly, there's deeper stuff going on, I will make a recommendation, a referral out, and support that student in that, because I'm not all things to them. Ultimately, I'm trying to point them to Jesus. And sometimes that requires a team. Oftentimes that requires a team. It takes a village. So one of the most unique things about Gen Z is they're fluid. I thought this was a really interesting distinction. For Gen Z, it's not so much this or that, but rather this and that. Awareness and vulnerability, individuality and community, digital and physical, commerce and entertainment, consumption and production, value and values. So when I went over this with two different people, at this point they grabbed their heads and said, "This doesn't make any sense." And I was like, "Yeah, well, teenagers don't always make sense because they're trying to figure out their world." But this makes it even more complicated. It feels like they want a little bit of everything. And like I said, this isn't all students, but this is definitely the culture that you see that is happening. And there's good things and bad things about that. In their world, whether they experience it, feel it, believe it or not, their world has become very non-binary. It's not one or the other. So the three ways that I identified this were work, home, school, entertainment, communication. That's one fluid, let's say that's one river. How about that? Where for them, the use of technology, the way they set up their lives, it's all interwoven, right? And this has affected our older generations too, right? We work from home now, and so we can work from home and chat with somebody. I see my kids FaceTiming a friend and also playing a video game together. They do their homework and they've got the TV on. You can do games during the day at school. You can do your schoolwork while you're waiting for your sport to start after school. There aren't distinct stopping points anymore. It's not like you go to school, you go to your after school activity, then you do your homework and go to bed, and then on the weekends you do this. It's all because of the way they're connected and the way that even our schools are starting to be set up for learning. It all combines together. One of the things I was thinking about is my daughter, who is in 5th grade. I have 3 kids. My 5th grader is doing a project at school she's super pumped about. And I think the assignment, she's going to correct me when I get home, but I think the assignment was to create a presentation on how to make something. And so it was probably more involved than that. I'm sorry, MJ. But she gets to make a video and she gets to make this presentation about making donuts. And then she's done this before. She sets up our kitchen like a cooking show with her iPad, and she makes a video of her cooking the donuts, and then she gets to bring them back to school and share them with the class, which she did get an okay for. And so that's just one way they take that entertainment of being able to make videos, and she loves to bake. She's going to own a bakery someday. Like that she gets to do all of these things, but it's still a school assignment, which is so cool that she gets to take something that she loves and make it her own and make it creative. The same way, like with TikTok, that there's towards being anti-TikTok, but then I do see some good information coming from it. I don't know if it outweighs the bad, but there is good information, and I have where students will send me videos for something that might be hard for them to tell me, but they'll show me a video in a way of communicating. It's also really cool, so you really can't deny that. The next one, truth, fact, feeling, and fiction. Right now, there is very confusing with what you find. Well, they said this. I found it on the internet. It must be true. You would think we would know that by now, that maybe we would discern, but we don't. It's hard. People sound like experts. People can sound really reliable, but they don't have the wherewithal at that age to really sort it out. And then finding facts, and maybe I don't feel great about that fact, and so I'm going to go find something else. And so that all gets kind of murky. When you start talking about apologetics with students, I feel this way, but I read this, but this is true, but I don't want this part to be true. And being able to name those things is really important. The last part of it is sex, gender, and family. Families are more diverse than ever, which is great. Only about half of teenagers today believe that gender is defined by one sex at birth. Roughly 1 in 8 Gen Zers describe their sexual orientation as something other than heterosexual. About 3 in 10 know someone who has changed their gender identity. I don't know where everybody's from. I've lived around the St. Louis area. I think like 13 or 14 years, I don't know. And we have these conversations in my house. I mean, they're coming up in my 5th graders class. And so it's important to talk to our kids about these. Name that these are real struggles that people are talking about. This is happening. This is where we're at right now. And a lot of kids are defining these things for themselves. And they're on their own, and then they're telling adults what they think or believe. And so it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because that's a big thing for a kid to figure out on their own. And so they need support. They need adults to talk to them. All of this is really normal to our Gen Z friends, these conversations about fluidity with sex and gender. But they're not for anybody older. These are new. Like, we remember when court decisions were made. My kids don't know any different. This is the way their life is always been. What are you talking about, Mom? Like, it's fine. There's a quote that I love, Mark Yarhouse quote, where he says, "If you have met one transgender person, you have met one transgender person." So I think that the temptation is for us who are a little bit older and maybe looking at this and trying to figure these issues out for ourselves, is that we want to put people in boxes. Well, I know this person, so everybody must be this way. Well, I know this struggle, so it must look all the same way for everybody. That's not the case. Jesus didn't treat anybody that way, right? He talked to the woman at the well. He talked to the woman at the well and spoke to her in terms that she understood. He called Zacchaeus out of a tree and talked to him about accounting. He spoke to people where they were. And it's the same way with Gen Z, is that we can't assume that we have this figured out for them. And so I think that it is really important to enter these conversations with our friends with open hands, because chances are they might change their mind. They're young. I made decisions when I was in 7th grade that sure wouldn't hold up now at 41. But there are some friends who are dealing with this, who are gay. And so we've got to hold it open-handed to enter into conversations with our friends, to care for them, and to point them towards Jesus. Okay. Whew. Gen Z is social justice oriented. This has changed how they embrace each other. I read this. I thought this was such a cool differentiation. Baby boomers embraced anti-establishment causes. Millennials took up environmental causes. And Gen Z is motivated by human equality. This makes a difference, being the biggest generation. Those who are entering the workforce, our churches, they care about human equality. This is what they're thinking about. They are paying attention to the people that are around them, and it's important. And we can learn a lot from them. What's interesting, though, is that what I find is that it's kind of different with faith, that they are quick to embrace one another based on looking different. But we are becoming a society that's very quick to push people away who think differently, who, especially about faith. And so I think that's really important to point out in conversations. I have that constantly with friends that, oh, hold on. You said that we treat everybody with dignity, but you just shut this person down. And to be able to have those conversations and going back and forth with different things is very important. And this is also going to change how they want our churches to look like, what they expect out of church, how they create their jobs, the professions that they go into. Other people and how they are treated are going to become very important to them. Gen Z is individualistic. Do you remember, I might be dating myself, do you remember that song Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls? I'm not going to sing it. Yeah, it's a great song. So it came out when I was in high school. And then in college, when I was a Young Life leader, we would sing it so loud at Young Life Club. And it's a very angsty song. It's great. So I'll just read part of the lyrics. And I don't want the world to see me because I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. We would sing that so loud. Thank you. We would sing that so loud because nobody understood us. And we loved that angst. And we, I came on this week and I turned it up in my car and I was like, hold on a minute, light bulb. And so that was our narrative, right? And now, with the Gen Z being individualistic, instead of sitting in that angst of nobody knows me, I'm on my own, or this is who I am, we're quick to flag, this is who I am. I'm going to identify who I am, and I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to find people who are just like me, who encourage me, and this is where I'm going to be. I don't know if this song would hold up the same way. Maybe it would. I'll try it on my kids later. But it's different. They're claiming different things about who they are, and they're wanting to be individuals, which is so great. So my kids, the students in my youth group, when they're asking questions about Jesus, they really want to know. Like, they really want to know what Jesus has to say about discrimination, about wearing masks, about whatever. They do want to know. They just need to be asked. And they need the right people to be asking because everybody's asking them. And so it creates this really interesting place where kids can own who they are. One of my kids is involved in a club after school that her friends started that is just a place for, they wanted to call it the Weird Kids Club, but they weren't allowed, so they call it diverse. I love that so much. And so they gather together and they are all working on their own projects. Like, somebody's writing a book, somebody's drawing this picture, somebody's inventing this thing, and they can all come together and share their projects and give each other feedback. They're in middle school. Like, how cool is that? So they're really owning who they are and wanting to run with that in really great ways. But the problem is they're also owning those in ways that maybe aren't great, that maybe are harmful to them. Maybe they don't understand who they really are. And they're planting that flag saying, this is who I am. And what's hard about that is that when they change their mind, we've got to give them grace to change their mind. And so this also plays into the decisions that they make, what's harmful to them, what's not harmful to them. But with the internet, with even creating your own club at school, you can find your people and be convinced of anything. And so I think naming things and celebrating the differences in our Gen Z friends is huge. I read in a business article that this is posed to be the most creative generation yet, which is really cool. So the last one, Gen Z is truly post-Christian. This made me laugh. So today at church, a guy in a suit tried to drown me, and I kid you not, my family just stood there taking pictures. So the problem with being post-Christian, so a lot of these kids have grown up with millennial parents. So we're beginning to become the post-Christian generation. And now, so these kids have truly, some of them have never grown up in church, have never been talked to about Jesus. He is a brand new person in their lives. And so what we see in that is that the Bible lacks authority to this generation, because you're fighting against the truth and my truth and your truth, and defining those things. And so there is pushback on, well, how do I know that's the truth? And I think that is the key to conversations right now with Gen Z, is pushing back on that and creating conversations where there's nuance, that you can bring the conversation back to what faith is, and break down those conversations of, well, I was told this, that person acts like this, and bringing it in front of them and saying, what do you think? So something interesting about Gen Z is that they have lost faith in church systems, but faith in church leaders is high. So they're looking at individuals. They've heard things about the church. They're pushing back against groups, but there's difference in who people are. And we can see that on TikTok. We can see that on books. I know in my own Bible study, we're like, ooh, I like that person. And that's where we are. There's some good. There's also some not great. We can have a very narrow scope, which, if it was widened. So this brings me back to kind of close. So this brings me back to my friends and the Bible stories that they named. So we've got the very start of Genesis in creation. So the problem, if we look at all of these trends, we can see why Genesis is a problem. Man and woman are binary terms. So for my friend who is gay, and seeing that man and woman were created together makes her feel out of place. That story isn't for her in her mind. Sin. The fact that something is inherently wrong. That the way that one of my friends pointed this out and said, well, it all fell on Eve and it's all her fault and I can't accept that. And my response was, let's put a pin in that and can we meet for coffee this week? So we need to talk about that. That it's very definitive. That they could be told that something's wrong. And they can't figure their way out of it. And that as individuals, they could all be lumped together. And I'm not like Eve. I'm not like Adam. I would be different. That Adam and Eve couldn't realistically figure out a different plan. You know, like, surely we have all these things at our fingers. Like, surely they could have figured something out. And Eve was seen as weak and non-empowered, which Mark alluded to. That's a narrative that, we're pushing back to, that men and women are equal, that women have been treated differently in the past. So is the Bible treating them that way? Hold on a minute. There's problem with that when you look at value, which is why I said, hey, let's put a pin in that and let's continue that discussion. The hope. So when we look at Jesus and the Samaritan woman, that he went in the middle of the day and saw this woman who was doing her job, was getting water at a time of day where nobody else was around, somebody of a different background, different ethnicity, that he would approach her and talk to her and offer her something, that he treated her with dignity. He went to where she was. This is the story that resonates. It resonates with their desire for human equality. It resonates with the way that he treated women with dignity. He spoke to her, he talked to her. She was a different class, and Jesus didn't judge her. He talked to her like he would talk to anybody else. Jesus spoke to her in terms that she understood, They were drawing water. So he started talking about living water, which is confusing, but he explained that. But she got water. Jesus met her where she was. He didn't ask her to change first. And I think that's a fear that our generation is looking at is, well, you're going to make me change who I am. And this is where I planted my flag. This is who I am. But no, Jesus just met her. He just wanted her to know who he was. What happens after that is her story. So not only is he what we all want, we can also historically prove that. We can go back to where Jesus walked. We can go back to where he lived. And you can prove those things along with information. And so when we look at this generation, it's a lot. But students are a lot. They're also really fun. And if you ask them a question, they want to talk. So asking them, where do you get your information? What influences you? What do you like to do? What do you hope for someday? Just normal questions. That's what they want to know. And I think we can get really hung up on other things about this generation. But those are the main things, is they just want to be known. And that's what we all want. But we're having to learn a kind of a different language. And it's important for us to know that and be taught for ourselves and not just to be taught by them. So, thank you.